for jokes, turn it over to Stu and Mark. I assume you're ready.
Well, good morning again, folks. Great pleasure to have our good friend Mark Albertson with us again today. As Joe mentioned earlier, he's going to talk to us about Laurel and Hardy, and that should be a really fun thing to hear about. Mark's a historical research editor at the Army Aviation Magazine in Monroe, and is the historian for the Army Aviation Association of America. He's authored 6 books. He teaches as an adjunct at the Norwalk Community College and as an avid speaker, as we know, lecturing on a myriad of topics in a variety of venues. In May of 2005, Mark was presented with the General Assembly citation by both houses of the state legislature in Hartford in 2005 for his efforts in commemorating the centennial of the battleship Connecticut. So with great pleasure, we introduce and welcome again, Mark Albertson. It's all yours, Mark.
Good morning. Thank you, Stu. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well here. This is, I've been told that, well, isn't a talk like this a little out of your line? Isn't this, it's usually history, politics, current events, that kind of thing. No, not really. I was brought up on Laurel and Hardy, and they were my favorite comedians. The Marx Brothers, W.C. Fields, Abbott Costello. I mean, some of you folks remember that era better than I do, probably. But I was weaned on those when I was a kid. And Laurel and Hardy, without a doubt, is one of the greatest comedy teams ever assembled. They, unlike many people in their generation, when movies went from silence to sound, they were able to make the jump. Not everybody was, and so when you go back and you listen to comments made by Dick Van Dyke, Jerry Lewis, Chuck McCann, Orson Bean, even Danny Kaye, who was a big fan of Laurel and Hardy, they not only saw Laurel and Hardy as great comedians, but excellent actors. You're coming out of that era, the era of sound, where you didn't have a voice. So you had to act by the way you walked, your reaction to situations, your facial gestures. And if you recall Stan Laurel, he was one of the best. He really was. And the partnership will last not as a partnership, but as a union of 2 friends. Once Hal Roach teamed them up for good in 1927, that partnership really lasts until Oliver Hardy dies in 1957. And it was more than a partnership, it was a friendship. Unlike how, you know what happened on Martin and Lewis. You know what happened between Abbott and Costello. Did Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy have their differences of opinion? Yeah, of course they did. But you're going to, as you see here, Stan Laurel is going to be the heart and soul of this partnership with regards to creation. He was a director. He was a screenwriter. He spent hours after they're done shooting in the hole there, watching these films over and over again and redirecting them and rewriting them. And Oliver Hardy, hey Stan, you do whatever you want, I'll go along with it. That's how it worked. That is how it worked. Now, I'm not saying that Oliver Hardy was talentless. No, he was not. He was actually a good singer. He was actually a good dancer. He was, like Jackie Gleason, very nimble on his feet for somebody that weighed 280 pounds. There aren't many heavy people like this who are that nimble. Of course, in 1917, when the draft board came calling, they turned him down, obviously, here for obvious reasons. But Stan Laurel was actually born in England on June 16, 1890, pardon me. His real name was not Stan Laurel. It was Arthur Stanley Jefferson. That was his name. He really does not become Stan Laurel legally, that is, until 1932. He was known as Stan Laurel before that, but not legally until 1932. That's quite a while. His father, Arthur Joseph Jefferson, owned theaters, owned several of them. His mother did a lot of the booking, so it was a theater influenced family here. And Stan Laurel, his father owned a couple of studios in England and one in Scotland. And Stan Laurel himself, being influenced by his family, he got to see a lot of acts on stage. And early in the 20th century, he gets a chance to make his stage debut in Glasgow. And he has a small part and it goes over. But as he gets older, and I'm talking as an older teen, he is seen here by a man who's big in entertainment at this point. And I'm talking 1919. The man's name is Fred Carnot. The Fred Carnot troupe was well known here in the British Isles. And Stan Laurel was taken on as a comedian, as a bit player, as a dramatic actor. Again, go back to what I mentioned, what people like Danny Kaye said they were good actors. Well, he's cutting his teeth here on stage in the Fred Carnot troupe. Now, what's interesting here with the Fred Carnot troupe in 1910, 1911, he's 20, 21 years old here. They're going to make a tour of the United States. This is going to be a big chance for him to now not to be known just in England, but in the United States. And so they travel to the United States. He does a few cities and he finds something out here. He doesn't want to leave. He wants to stay. And he sees great promise here in this country known as the United States. So he will stay here. He has a man by the name of Joe Rock, who will be his producer. He will also marry one of the ladies he performs with, May Dahlberg. This lady was from Australia. She's very demanding. She's very critical. She's hard to get along with. I've just started giving talks on Humphrey Bogart, and that's what Bogey's going to wind up with when he marries Mayo Malott, an actress who became a drunk and actually used to hit Bogey. The neighbors used to call them the battling Bogarts. You can hear them 2-3 doors down the street. Well, Stan Laurel, Arthur Stanley Jefferson's situation is not much better. And Joe Rock sees Stan Laurel as a real upcoming talent here. In fact, he winds up being an understudy for Charlie Chaplin, who he considered. Stan Laurel always said that Charlie Chaplin was the greatest comedian he'd ever seen. And he's influenced by Chaplin. If you watch sometimes how Stan Laurel walked, if you watch certain gestures he made, then go back and watch film clips of Charlie Chaplin. The apple didn't fall far from the tree here. In fact, you can extend this. If you watch early performances of Dick Van Dyke, that's Stan Laurel written all over it. He was a big fan of Stan Laurel, and well before Stan Laurel died, he got to be a good friend of Stan Laurel's. And Stan Laurel gave him a lot of advice. And so when next time you watch reruns of the Dick Van Dyke Show, watch certain things that Dick Van Dyke does, like maybe tripping over a chair or maybe getting his tie caught in a desk drawer. That's Stan Laurel written all over it. But Stan Laurel, Joe Rock sees Stan Laurel as having a lot of talent, not as just an actor, but as a screenwriter. And this is huge. However, he's got that baggage, May Dahlberg. So Joe Rock is able to arrange a separation between the two. and he's able to get May Dahlberg on a boat and ships her back to Australia, where she probably belonged. And so now Stan Laurel is free of that baggage, and he begins to develop his talent, appearing in movies, appearing on stage. And he's going to be noticed here by a big name in Hollywood, Hal Roach. And Roach is going to hire him. This is in 1925. He doesn't just hire Stan Laurel as an actor / comedian. He also hires him as a director and a screenwriter. And in the next 2 years, from 1925 to 1927, Stan Laurel will appear, screenwrite, direct 50 movies. Now, let's understand something. Many of these movies were what, 20 minutes long, 23 minutes long? But Hal Roach sees a real talent here with Stan Laurel, or Arthur Stanley Jefferson, if you will, and he thinks he's going places, but he wants him in his stable. Oliver Hardy. Oliver Hardy is not born Oliver Hardy. He is born Norval Hardy. He is born in Georgia. He is a Southerner, and he's born in Harlem, Georgia. And his father's name was Oliver. It is after his father dies that he takes the name Oliver. And if you recall in the movies, what's your name? Oliver Norval Hardy. And that's how he got that name. Interesting, he was, remember when Ralph Edwards used to have that show, This Is Your Life, in the 1950s?
Yep.
Well, they had Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy on, and they got hoodwinked into this. They had no clue they were going to be on the show. And then Ralph Edwards and his crew had many acquaintances and many people that they had worked with on stage, and Laurel and Hardy were shocked. Well, they found one lady from Oliver Hardy's past. This lady used to walk to school with Oliver Hardy. And she said, Oliver Hardy would dance and sing on the way to school. He would dance and sing on the way home. Well, you know how it was for when you were growing up. If a girl was having a problem, didn't you pick up her books for her? Didn't you carry things for her? Of course you did. Well, guess who carried the books here? This lady who wound up on the show 50 years later and met Oliver Hardy after 5 decades. She used to carry the books for both her and him while he danced and sang to school and danced and sang on the way back. But he'll go to Florida. Now, keep in mind, in 1908, 10, up to 1917, Florida was a rival to Hollywood. This is where Oliver Hardy is going to cut his teeth in film. He will be with the Lubin Studios. And between 1914 and 1917, in a 3-year period, he made 177 movies. This guy's working. Many of these are just 12, 15, 20, 23 minutes apiece. He appeared as a comic. He appeared as a dramatic actor. He appeared as a heavy. He appeared in light drama. He got to be a well-rounded performer. The problem here is World War I comes along, and guess what happens to the movie studios in Florida? They collapsed. So he packs up and he goes to Hollywood. He meets up with Hal Roach. This is like 1920. And so he begins to appear with Hal Roach. He's making these short movies. He appears with Charlie Chaplin. Of course, he gets third billing here, but he appears with Charlie Chaplin. But again, he's doing comedy. He's doing drama. He's a bad guy. He's a good guy. He's a well-rounded performer. They have him doing a variety of movies, a variety of performances. He does, by the way, he does make a movie in 1921 with Stan Laurel. This is the first time they're paired up. The movie is called Lucky Dog. Of course, nobody remembers this movie. I don't even know if the movie still exists. Keep in mind, you're talking about movies made on cellulose with harsh chemicals. And one of the reasons some of these movies no longer exist is because the chemicals ate the movies. It's a shame because by 1927, Oliver Hardy, I mentioned he made 177 movies in 3 years in Florida. By the time 1927 rolled around, when he's finally paired up for good with Stan Laurel, he had made 250 movies. And out of those 250, only 100 survived the harsh chemicals. Now, Hal Roach, after 1925, 26, he signs Laurel and Hardy to separate contracts. In 1927, they will be signed as a team, and this starts the team. And interesting here too, in 1927, they make a movie called Putting Pants on Henry. Now, this is about Stan Laurel coming here as a Scotchman. He's in kilts, and he meets this American Oliver Hardy, and Oliver Hardy helps him through his trials and tribulations. That movie really isn't regarded too well, but there is a movie they're going to make in December of 1927. The movie was lost for decades. The movie was found about maybe 30 years ago. It is now considered by the American Film Institute to be an American treasure. The movie is called The Battle of the Century. Hal Roach made this movie. This sounds like a Max Sennett job, but Hal Roach made this movie. It is history's greatest pie fight. The movie lasts about 23 minutes. And there's another bit comedian in here who to me was one of the greatest bit comedians you'll ever find. His name was Charlie Hall. He's a short guy. If you saw him, you'd probably remember him. He was a foil for Laurel and Hardy in 50 of their movies. He was a brilliant bit comedian. And it starts off where Laurel and Hardy are walking down the street. They get into a beef with Charlie Hall, and Charlie Hall hits Oliver Hardy in the face with a pie. And so Oliver Hardy gets a pie and hits him in the face. Charlie Hall goes to hit, because Stan Laurel pushed him. So he goes to hit Stan Laurel with a pie. He throws the pie. Stan Laurel ducks, and they hit a fourth guy. The fourth guy comes over, and now there's a pie truck sitting on the corner, and they're getting all the pies out of the pie truck. I mean, this movie you can find on YouTube. It's there, the Battle of the Century. And finally, by the end of the movie, this pie fight is almost an entire city block on a long distance shot. There are pies on the truck. There are pies on the sidewalk. There are pies on cars. There's pies all over people. There are pies on the building. And supposedly, according to history, Hal Roach bought 3,000 cream pies for this movie. But the pie fight is absolutely priceless. It even shows one guy sitting in a dentist chair. His mouth is wide open. The dentist is working on his teeth, and a pie comes through the open window and hits the guy in the face. The guy takes the apron off. He joins the pie fight. At one point, Stan Laurel is in the pie truck. He's half covered with cream, and people are yelling at him, "I want two." And he shows his fingers two, and he goes back and brings people 2 pies. He keeps the fight going. Finally, when they break it up, that's when the distant shot comes. It's priceless to see. It really is. Another movie they make, which actually has been extremely well regarded, was called Big Business. Now, this is 1929. Sound movies are beginning to come out. Already the Marx Brothers have made Coconuts. If you remember that movie for when they were down Florida. And I always remember Groucho Marx, who I always thought had one of the greatest gifts of gab of anybody in Hollywood history. When he's auctioning off houses, and he says to the crowd, "And these houses are stucco, and believe me, you're going to get stucco." The sight gags in this movie are terrific. But Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy make this silent movie. It's called Big Business. And the gist of the movie is they are going door to door. This is in California. They're going door to door selling Christmas trees in July. And obviously they're not too successful. So they go to this house, and the third actor in this, the third wheel here, is another one of these great bit comedians. And maybe you remember him. He had a balding head, a big brush mustache. His name was Jimmy Finlayson, and he had a priceless Scottish brogue. Everyone in Hollywood called him the Finn. He was another one of these brilliant bit comedians. In fact, it's said that Stan Laurel brought a lot of these people over from the British Isles, like Charlie Hall, Jimmy Finlayson, and they hit it big as these big comedians with Hal Roach. And they get to Jimmy Finlayson's house, and Oliver Hardy knocks on the door, and they make their pitch, the Christmas tree, and Finlayson slams the door. But when he slams the door, a branch of the tree is stuck in the door. So now Oliver Hardy has to knock on the door again. Finlayson opens the door, and Stan Laurel's not quick enough to pull out the tree. Finn closes the door. The tree's still stuck on the door. They knock on the door again. This time he's really ticked off, Finlayson is, and Stan pulls the tree out, but he got the cuff of his coat stuck in the door. So now they knock on the door a fourth time. Finlayson swings open the door, and he's madder than a wet hen, and he's got a pair of clippers. He cuts the Christmas tree in half and slams the door. Well, Stan Laurel knocks on the door, and as soon as Finlayson opens the door, he rips the lights off the front of the house. Finlayson runs out to their truck. He pulls the headlights off the truck. The three of them march back. Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy pull the trees out of the front yard. Now they're going back and forth, and they're ripping the house apart. Jimmy Finlayson's ripping their truck up. It's really funny to see. It's called Big Business. Again, you can find it on YouTube. There's a story behind this movie. When Hal Roach was going to make this movie, he made this in downtown Los Angeles. There was a fella who donated his house. He was having his house rebuilt. So he figures, why can't I have my house in this movie and I don't have to pay anybody to take part of my house apart? I can have Hal Roach do it for nothing. The problem here is Hal Roach went to the wrong house. They tore apart the wrong house. That was the story, but the movie itself is priceless. Of course, with more and more movies becoming sound, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy are able to make the jump, and they begin making sound pictures. And keep in mind, one of the reasons I was asked to do Laurel and Hardy, I was by the Weston Senior Center. Many of these people that go there wanted something of a light nature, owing with our politics in 2020 and COVID. You know, people are getting the bunker mentality. They want something light. So I said, how about Laurel and Hardy? They said, yeah, great. That's how this starts. That's really how this starts. And I got the idea from Laurel and Hardy themselves. Picture yourself, 1931, 1933. 33 is the height of the Depression. If you got 10 cents, you can go to the movies and you can get your mind off the Depression. And that's what Laurel and Hardy did. And that accounted for their popularity. And before I'm done, I'm going to get to the end of their popularity too, because they didn't know how popular they really were. And they made a movie in 1932. It's called The Music Box. I'm sure many of you remember this, and I'm sure you've seen it more than once. They have their own transportation company in Los Angeles. It's a horse and a wagon is what it is. It's not a truck. And they have to deliver a piano. And if you remember, they have to push this piano box up that long flight of stairs. And 4 times the piano comes down the stairs, dragging Oliver Hardy down the stairs. There was an author who wrote a book on them about 40 years ago. I can't remember his name. And on the cover is a picture of Oliver Hardy sitting on that sidewalk. He's got those denim coveralls on, and he's looking up the stairs at Stan Laurel, and there's the piano box behind him. And this writer said, on that hot day in Los Angeles, with those coveralls on, weighing 280 pounds, no comedian ever labored more mightily for his paycheck as Oliver Hardy did that day, making that movie. Well, it paid. And there was another great bit comedian in here, Billy Gilbert, another brilliant bit comedian. Well, it pays off. Laurel and Hardy at the 1933 Oscar ceremony got Best Oscar of the Year of 1932 for the best short. They won an Oscar. This helps their career a lot. Sons of the Desert, which is a full-length film. In the end, they're going to make 107 movies, whether they're shorts or and they make 23 full-length movies. They made a movie in 1934, and I'm sure it's on every Thanksgiving and it's on every Christmas, The March of the Wooden Soldiers, which I find is a classic. It mates up Laurel and Hardy with opera singers. Now, to me, that was a stretch, but I think it worked. Stan Laurel was disappointed in this movie. He did not think this was a Laurel and Hardy movie. And yet, here we are, Stan Laurel. You know, when they made these movies, Stan Laurel, you had big name directors. I mean, big name directors who did comedy in the 1920s, 1930s. Leo McCarey being one of them. Leo McCarey was a big name. He directed Laurel and Hardy. He directed the Marx Brothers. Stan Laurel, through Hal Roach, and you won't see his name on many, if you watch these movies, pay attention to the credits, you won't see Stan Laurel's name on many of these movies, but obviously Laurel and Hardy as an actor or comedian. However, he would take the movie when they were done in the day's shoot, take the can, go into the projection booth, and he's there till late at night, rerunning the movie, he's got his pad and pencil out, making a list of what we have to change here, what we're going to rewrite here. And Hal Roach hired big name directors, big name screenwriters. Guess who's going to overrule them? Stan Laurel. You think that went over well with some high paid directors and producers and screenwriters? No, but Roach let him get away with it. Why? Because he knows what he's doing. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the partnership Laurel and Hardy. This is somebody that knows what he's doing. Yet, many times, he should have got maybe an Oscar for screenwriting. He won't get that. He's doing this all in the background. And Hal Roach loved him. However, with the movie March of the Wooden Soldiers, or Babes in Toyland, if you will, this is where they begin the split. Hal Roach liked this movie. Stan Laurel did not. But they continue to work with Hal Roach. They won't split. But Stan Laurel continues to rewrite. He continues to redirect some of these movies. One in particular I like was Tit for Tat. Again, Charlie Hall is in this. And they had made a movie the year before. This was like 1935. And Oliver Hardy, Oliver Hardy had the gout. His leg is in the air. It's got this, this big bandage, just twice the size of his leg. His leg's in the air. And the doctor was Billy Gilbert. Now, the doctor's Billy Gilbert. This isn't going well. And he says, what you need to do, sir, is stay off rich food, lead a more sedate life. In fact, why don't you go out into the mountains and relax? So Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy rent a trailer, and they're going to hook it up to their car, and they're going out in the woods. Well, they stop at this abandoned cabin, which had been used by revenuers here who dumped their booze down the well. And so when they want fresh water, guess what's going to happen here? They're going to be flushing out this fresh water. It's all full of booze, hot, bootleg booze. Well, Charlie Hall and his wife, Mae Bush. Now, Mae Bush was a talented female actress of this period. She was Laurel and Hardy's wife in a number of these movies, and she was pretty darn good at it. They're walking down the dirt road, and Charlie Hall's carrying a gas can, and they stop at the trailer. And Charlie Hall says, can my wife stay here while I go get the gas for the car? They say, sure. Well, when Charlie Hall comes back, she's been drinking the water with Laurel and Hardy. They're all three of them are all tanked. They're all singing, and they're not singing too well. And Charlie Hall comes in, and he's ticked off. He's angry, and this is when it begins. They start tearing the trailer apart. They start ripping his clothes apart, and they meet a year later. Laurel and Hardy in this movie Tit for Tat open up an electric and hardware store. Well, guess who has the little grocery store next door? Charlie Hall. And they remember each other, and they wind up tearing both stores apart. It's funnier. It's funnier than all get-go to see. However, for that movie in 1935, they will be nominated for another Oscar. They won't win it, but they got a second Oscar nomination here in 1935 for the best short. They lost. In 1936, 1937, they're continuing to make these brilliant shorts and movies. But in 1937, they make a movie which I think is one of their best. It's called Way Out West. Jimmy Finlayson is in it. This movie you can buy easily enough. It's really one of their more popular movies. And in this movie is one of the most priceless scenes with Laurel and Hardy ever filmed. It's about 1/3 the way through the movie. And it's about the Western days. And Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy get to this town. And they're going to get into the saloon. And there's 4 or 5 guys sitting on the porch of the saloon. And they're playing a banjo, they're playing a couple of guitars, and they're singing. And Oliver Hardy and Stan Laurel walk up. And as these guys are playing this catchy tune, Oliver Hardy begins to tap his foot. Then he begins to tap his leg, and he starts to dance. Stan Laurel joined in with him. And it's a priceless scene to watch. They dance together, and this was not choreographed. They just did this. And it all started with Oliver Hardy tapping his foot. It's probably one of the most priceless scenes they've ever done. The timing, oh, you'd think they'd been doing this for 10 years. The timing is exquisite. The looks on their faces are absolutely priceless. And the dance itself is really something to watch. They're not Fred Astaire, I'll give you that. But the timing, and it's unchoreographed, it's absolutely brilliant, and it added a measure to this movie. By 1940, they'd split with Hal Roach, and they will go with Warner Brothers and 20th Century Fox. They will make 8 more movies between 1940 and 1945. Some of these movies are not, I'll admit, are not their best. However, again, it's Laurel and Hardy. We're no longer in the Depression. We are now in the Second World War. And people will go forget their troubles by going to these 8 movies. These movies will probably make more money than any other Laurel and Hardy movies made thus far. They cost about $300,000 to make, but these movies will take in $3, $4, $5 million a pop, which is not bad for the 1940s. By 1945, 46, they'll make one more movie. It's called Utopia in 1950, but now they're doing some radio work. They're doing some stage work, but Stan Laurel got sick. Oliver Hardy was asked by many people to do a spot, be in a movie. He always said no. He didn't want to act without Stan Laurel, and Stan was sidelined. I won't perform without Stan. That's what he said. Stan had to tell him. John Ford wanted Oliver Hardy in this cavalcade of stars. And he said, no, because Stan is not with me, I won't. Stan told him, do it. Don't wait for me, do it. So he did. Before Stan will get well, and before they on their way to the British Isles for several years to do interviews, radio shows, stage work. A good friend of Oliver Hardy's asked him to be in a feature film. And well, I don't know. And Stan said, for Pete's sakes, do it. So he will make this movie in 1948. It will come out in 1949. It happens it happens after the War of 1812, and he's in it with his good friend. They were good friends, John Wayne. The movie is called The Fighting Kentuckian. It's a pretty good movie to see if you haven't seen it. I think it's one of John Wayne's underrated movies. Him and Oliver Hardy, it's priceless just to watch the two of them. They're supposed to be the Kentucky woodsmen who go to Louisiana with a bunch of other Kentuckians. Oliver Hardy was kind of you might think out of character here, but no, he's not. And so it was quite a thing to see Duke Wayne and Babe Hardy in the same picture. After that movie came out, the two of them go to England, and they're going to tour England, Scotland, and Ireland. And the train gets into Victoria Station. And they go to get out of the car. They can't get out of the car. It's packed with fans. And it's at this point they begin to understand. It took them all this time, 1949, 1950, to figure out how popular they really were. And Stan turns to Ollie. Ollie's crying. They didn't understand how popular they were. They finally get out of the car, and they're going to do their interviews, be on stage, and they go to Ireland, and they're on a boat. The boat pulls into Cobh, the harbor at Cobh, and the boat can't get to the dock. Well, why can't the boat get to the dock? Because there's too many other boats in the way with well-wishers. And again, Ollie starts crying. They didn't realize how popular they really were. And they will come back to the United States in 1952, 1953, and they do make that movie Utopia. And they wind up on Ralph Edwards' show. You know, This Is Your Life. And they didn't know they were going to be on this show. And they were surprised. Their wives are there. Stan Laurel's daughter, Lois, is there. And that's a nice little side story because she was always afraid. She said in an interview, she was afraid of Oliver Hardy when she was knee-high to a grasshopper because it's Ollie who's always slapping around Stanley in the movies, until she finally realized what it was. And Oliver Hardy really became almost like a second father to her, almost like a godfather, that kind of thing. And so even though they had their differences of opinions at times, which you have to expect they are, Oliver Hardy died in 1957. Stan Laurel never really recovered from this. It hit him hard. It's like he lost his brother. It really hit him hard. And he went into a funk, a bad one. Many in Hollywood were trying to get Stan out of the funk. Gee, why don't you screenwrite for us? Why don't you be a consultant on this movie? No, he wouldn't do it. Danny Kaye, Chuck McCann, Orson Bean, Dick Van Dyke later, Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis was an ardent fan of Laurel and Hardy. He said in an interview, he said his father took him to a Laurel and Hardy movie. And he was awed. He says, when we went home, my father said, you hardly laughed. But he said he noticed one thing. Jerry Lewis watched this movie and his mouth was open. He went back to the theater and he said he saw the Laurel and Hardy movie 6 times in 2 days. What he would do is he would watch Stan Laurel specifically 3 times. Then when he went back and saw the movie another 3 times, he would watch Oliver Hardy. You can see that he's really enamored now with performing, even as a kid. This is his school. He admitted that. Later on, Jerry Lewis admitted that. He wanted Stan Laurel to work with him as a consultant for the movies he was making. Stan Laurel always refused. though Stan did come back to do one movie. He helped to organize the movie, helped to screenwrite it, and was a consultant. If you remember the movie, Jerry Lewis does not say a word on almost this entire movie. The Bellboy. Stan Laurel helped him make that movie. Dick Van Dyke. Dick Van Dyke, when he was an up-and-coming comic in the 1950s, his favorite, Stan Laurel. And he wanted to meet Stan Laurel. You know what he did? He got a Los Angeles phone book and he went down the names. He went down and he found a name, Stan Laurel. He called him up, explained what he was doing, and Stan says, yeah, come on over. He went to the house. Stan Laurel had lunch all set. The two sat down for about 4 or 5 hours. They had lunch, a couple of drinks, and they discussed comedy, movie making, directing, screenwriting. And it will be Dick Van Dyke who will give the eulogy at Stan Laurel's funeral. But all of these people, Peter Sellers was another one. If you remember the Pink Panther movies, well, who do you think had an effect on Peter Sellers? Laurel and Hardy. He admitted that on the Merv Griffin. Remember Merv Griffin show? And he had Peter Sellers on several times. And Merv Griffin asked him, you know, what was an influence on your comedy? And he goes, Laurel and Hardy. Jackie Gleason, Laurel and Hardy. The effect Laurel and Hardy had on that next crop that's going to come up in the 50s and the 60s, it's undeniable. They admit it. Laurel and Hardy. And many of them who said this thought of them as not only great comedians, but great actors. And just before Stan Laurel died in 1965, Orson Bean, Chuck McCann, and several others went to Stan Laurel, and they have a Laurel and Hardy fan club they were putting together. It was named after one of their movies. It's called Sons of the Desert. Stan Laurel gave this club his blessing prior to him dying. And that club is still open. It's got 150 chapters in the United States, Europe, and Australia. And they have their convention every year, you know, with the cups, the shirts, they show the movies, people sit down and they discuss the movies, and they also have their chapter meetings. There's 150 chapters of this still around. It's fascinating. You know, and interesting too, and I'll leave you with this. In 1960, at the Oscars that year, Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy, I guess they figured with Oliver dead 3 years, they better do this now. And they bestowed upon Laurel and Hardy a Lifetime Achievement Oscar. They already got the Oscar for the Music Box in 1933. They also had another Oscar nomination in 35. But now the partnership, and Stan Laurel will hold it, but he couldn't go to the ceremony because he wasn't feeling well. It was Danny Kaye. I've seen this acceptance speech by Kaye. It lasts about 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. It's a wonderful acceptance speech to watch. And he made sure, Danny Kaye did, that Stan Laurel got that Oscar. So their partnership, it was more than a partnership. It was an effort at, two guys who got together to entertain people for over 25 years. And it damn well worked. They were one of the greatest comedy teams ever assembled, but they were also good friends. Interesting, that partnership. They didn't end up like Abbott Costello did, which they wound up splitting, or like Martin and Lewis. It's hard for people to stay together that long in entertainment. Like with Dean Martin was a good singer. You think he was going to hang around with Jerry Lewis forever? No, it's not going to happen. Not going to happen. And they'll split. But Oliver Hardy, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy, their partnership and their talents, they were priceless. Glad they came along when they did. Glad they did. Anybody have any questions or comments or observations they want to share?
Thank Mark, that was terrific. It's interesting to see the number of people they touched in their lives and the successful people who followed after them. I have a quick question. Are you planning to write a book about this yourself?
I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind doing that. Another one that, besides Laurel and Hardy, I mean, I like Abbott and Costello. Groucho Marx really hits my funny bone with his gift of gab. I remember him just really quick when he was in Montreal. He's retired by this point. He's in Montreal, and his publicist comes up to it. He's staying at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel, which is a nice place. I've been there, and the publicist comes up and says, "Hey, Groucho, there's a Catholic priest down in the foyer. He's down in the lobby. He's a big fan, wants to meet you." So Groucho says, "Okay, let's go down." So they get in the elevator, down they go. Groucho, he was on the Dick Cavett show. He's telling the story, and he says, the doors just slide aside. He says, I was only 1 or 2 steps outside the elevator, and this priest is on me like a white on rice. And he says, he grabs my hand with both of his, and he's shaking my hand. I thought he was going to rip my arm off. Gee whiz, I'm a big fan. Saw all your movies, and I think you guys were great. And then this priest says, "I want to thank you for all the joy you brought into this world." And Groucho Marx, the big comeback king, says, "And I want to thank you for all the joy you took out of this world." How to make friends and influence people 101 here. That's Groucho. That was not just stage. That was in real life. That was Groucho. And Jack and what's his name? George Burns, who used to have lunch with him, said so. Groucho took control of the conversation. That's the way he was. So,
wow.
So all these guys are fascinating. They really are. I mean, you could do a book on all of them. You really could.
Okay.
You really could.
We'll wait for yours. All right, guys. If you have questions, raise your hand.
Without my hand, I don't know if you see my hand up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make that.
Mark, great presentation. It's hilarious. Who would you say today of the teams that are around, maybe not to the extent of Laurel and Hardy, would be the icons of comedy? Brooks and Wilder, or who are today's that closest to Laurel and Hardy in that group back in the 30s and 40s?
I can tell you, when for the short time that they performed together on Mork and Mindy, for the short time, is when they had Robin Williams and Jonathan Winters.
Oh my God.
They had, I saw that interview on Johnny Carson show when Johnny Carson had both of them on the same night. And Johnny Carson said, "I just stood back, just let him go," because they don't need a script. And he had Robin Williams on first, and Williams said, they ran out of film. We're still performing. They ran out of film. They write a script. What script? Who gives a damn? We're doing what we want. And they did. And when they had them, and when he had them both on that night, this was the one time I really saw because Jonathan Winters was Robin Williams' comic idol. That was his comic idol. And Jonathan Winters came, and when he finally sat down, he pointed to Robin Williams sitting next to him. He said to Johnny Carson, "Boy, I was really taken with this guy." And then he turns around and he says, "Of course, on those days you were on more medication."
Well, a story about Jonathan Winters. I was working in Brooks Brothers part-time while I was going to college, and Winters came in and he had his own salesman, and I was acting floor manager on the floor. So the salesman came up to me and said, "Joe, would you take care of Mr. Winters? He's looking for a top coat, a size 44. So I brought him over to the top coats and overcoats, and So he says, well, stay, show me what you got. And so I gave him a coat and he puts it on and he goes to the three-way mirror. And after trying on maybe the third coat, he starts putting on his act. And this was shortly before, he had to get some rehab, but he put on this act for about 15 minutes to himself and me. And
Oh,
he's
yeah.
going through all of these routines, ad-libbing and everything else. And I was rolling on the floor. And I tried to keep my decorum up because, it's Brooks Brothers, but
Oh, yeah.
he was hilarious.
Well, Steve Allen once said that when remember the old Steve Allen show, when he had Don Knotts, Bill Dana, and Pat Harrington at one point, and he said they used to take on a guest comic for a week. So he said one week we had Jonathan Winters, and he said they were doing their show in Cleveland for the week. Jonathan Winters was funny at the train station. He was funny on stage. He was funny in the hotel. He was funny. You couldn't shut him off.
Yeah.
And Johnny Carson asked him, well, how did you develop such a comedic talent? And he said, from my mother. She says, anything you look at, could be a folder, could be a furniture, anything you can make fun of. And that's where he got it from. He said, my father, he didn't have a sense of humor. But Robin Williams said, my father didn't have a sense of humor at all. But he said, one night as a kid, he says, I remember him watching Jonathan Winters and my father was laughing. So Robin Williams says, well, he's laughing at this guy. This guy must be great. And so when he got into Jonathan Winters as he's growing up, that became his comic idol. And that's how he did that ad lib type of humor. You can't compete with guys like this. I mean, and anything is funny, and they think like this.
Oh, yeah.
And so they're priceless. And you can't write a script for these guys.
I don't know if anybody remembers the Art Carney, Jonathan Winters, and a bunch of hats. And they would each put on a hat and go off on it. And I mean, they were, out of this world.
Well, Jackie Gleason said that Art Carney, when he was on the Johnny Carson show, I like giving that talk too on Gleason. That's a lot of fun. Gleason told Johnny Carson on the Johnny Carson show that Carney is one of the best dramatic actors and comedians we've ever had. That's what he said about Carney. And he said, Audrey Meadows, sensational. And she was. And so
May I
these
ask a
people come
question?
along, you got to enjoy it. Yeah, go right ahead.
May I ask a question?
Oh, hang on, wait a second. Raise your hand. We have several people waiting to ask questions on the system. Hit the reaction button. First, we got Bob Rosenthal. Hang on.
Yeah, hi. It's not so much a question as a comment. When I was 10 years old, my absolute favorite movie was one called March of the Wooden Soldiers.
Yeah.
Laurel and Hardy. To me, it was scary. It was funny. It was enlightening. I watched that on TV every time it was on.
Yeah, I still watch it. I still watch it in holiday season. I still watch it. I'm a sucker for that movie. I like that movie. But Stan Laurel criticized it. He didn't think it was a real Laurel and Hardy film. Maybe it doesn't have to be a real slapstick type movie, but to me, they were wonderful in it with the wooden soldiers. I like that movie. I did.
Good. Next question is from Howie. Jeff, I see you. Hang on. Go ahead, Howie.
That was a terrific presentation.
Thank you, sir.
And I remember, I guess it must have been your grandfather was here last time with the long beard. As far as this comedy you're referring to, I remember taking a course at Noah Community College. Somebody did something on the old time comedy. One of the professors. I don't know if he's there any longer. It doesn't make a difference. Why don't you give a course on some of these others? You know, Martin and Lewis, Abbott and Costello, all these great comedies. He showed us the movie of the piano. I mean, we sat there in class and we roared. I mean, we'd love to see this type of stuff again. You know, once the COVID's over and we go back to, Noah Community College, it was enjoyable.
Yeah, it's that kind of comedy was just people caught up in everyday situations. They weren't fighting a cause here.
No,
Like the Honeymooners, what
yes.
cause? The Lucy Show, what cause?
Archie
The
Bunker.
cause, the cause was being funny.
Yeah, Archie Bunker.
Well, that was
Yeah,
yeah, but that was a hidden cause.
That was
or the
all
Dick Van
causes.
Dyke
I
Show.
know it was.
Or if you want to get into it, and I remember, and I always like this as when I vaguely remembered as a little kid, the Phil Silvers Show, Sergeant Bilko.
Absolutely.
And I always thought Phil Silvers was the greatest TV con man who ever lived. He was funny. He really was. So we're talking about a really august group of people who knew how to hit your funny bone. They really did.
It's Caesar.
Yeah, another one. Yeah.
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 Bill Munko, then Jeff.
Mark, enjoyed
sir.
your talk.
Thank you. Thank you. sir.
I was a little surprised when you talked about March of the Wooden Soldiers, only because, and you say they never knew how famous they were. Probably for the last 50 years, come Thanksgiving morning, I get a call from one or two members of the family. You know what time it's on? Channel 11 or whatever it was.
Yep.
Unbelievable. And you know what? I'll watch it many times myself because I always thought, I even saw that in junior high school. We had it one day for a auditorium special. So, you know, they were pretty well known, but that one there, I can't, of all the ones I've ever seen they made, that had to be the one.
You know, it's funny too. The guy that played Silas Barnaby in that movie, now that's 1934, wound up playing the Indian that John Wayne will chase in The Searchers
Really? Wow.
and killed. Yeah, Chief Scar, the one who kidnapped his nieces, and then he goes after them. It's the same guy. It's 22 years later. Same
Yeah.
guy.
One last comment on that movie at the end when the wooden soldiers are marching. You know, by standards we have these days, it looks a little hokey, but you know, it still works.
It does. It does.
And Jeff Lowen.
Morning,
Yeah,
Jeff.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Jonathan Winters, did you sell an overcoat?
Yeah, he bought coats. I mean, he was a steady customer there. And Zero Mostel was
Oh, wow.
also a customer, and he was nuts entirely. No smoking in the store, and I was smoking Camels at the time, and he knew it, so he was always bumming cigarettes off of me when he came in with his sons, Josh and the other son. But he was another nut.
Oh,
These
God.
guys were truly, truly crazy people. Funny, hilarious.
Yeah, where are they now?
Yeah.
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 Any other last minute questions from the group? Seeing none. Mark, again, thank you so much. Fascinating presentation. Just by the questions, I can tell just more comments you brought back fond memories of the guys. It was terrific. So again, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Also, just want to remind the guys in 5 weeks or so, Mark will be back to talk to us about George Washington's farewell speech. So Mark, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, gents. Have yourselves a great afternoon. Oh, what I'm going to do is I'm going to forward that farewell address to you. So if anyone wants it, they can have it.
Okay, good.
I'm going to forward it to you. And it's 1796, but it's a brilliant farewell address, one of the best. And when I get into this, you're going to find a lot of what Washington warned about has happened.
Okay.
It's an interesting address.
Okay, so that'll be homework for us.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Back to you, Joe.
All right, Mark, again, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's always a
thank you.
pleasure having you with us. And I
Just a
wanna remind-
reminder for the board to stay on.
That's what I was going to say. I want to remind the board members to stay on. And as always,